Okay, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when you're actually watching this. My name is Ian Middleton. I am a travel and landscape photographer, and this is one of my quick photography tips. Now, in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how I photograph and then edit a low contrast hazy scene such as this. This is the view of the Church of St. Margaret in a little village called Brezganje. It's a little area that lies to the east of Ljubljana, the capital of Slovenia, and this viewpoint is from another little village called Maliver. Now, it's a great view. The mountains behind are the Kamnik Alps. They are the easternmost extremity of the European Alps, and obviously they look quite close, but they're actually very far off to the north. That's the magic of using a telephoto lens. You can see up here in the corner I shot this image at 400mm focal length. So I've compressed the scene and given the illusion that the mountains are sitting right behind the church itself, when they're actually not. Now, the one problem with these kinds of photographs, when you have mountains far off in the distance, you get the problem with haze, as we have here. Now, unless it's a super clear day, which sometimes it is but not always, you're going to get some kind of haze, but there is a way to deal with it. Now, the other problem you get when photographing mountainous scenes such as this is when the sun sets, and when you actually get the beautiful pink colors of the sunset like I have here. The cloud you can see is a lovely pink color, and pink light was falling just on the mountain tops here. It's a really beautiful moment. But of course the hills off to the west were obscuring the sun, and it threw the foreground and the church itself into the shade. So for a scene like this, the trick, in order, if you expose it correctly, if we pull down the exposure here, if you try to expose it more to the center of your histogram so that you darken the colors in the sky a bit, you also darken the foreground. So the trick when photographing a scene like this is to overexpose it a little bit. Push your exposure off to the right, as you can see here. This way you keep the foreground nice and bright, but you don't burn out the sky. So you can see there that there's no spikes here. None of the highlights are burned out. Everything is there. Although everything looks a little faded and hazy, it's still there, and so we can still work to recover that. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do now, it's useful to note here that I am working in Adobe Camera RAW. Always work with a raw image if you can, and I have the Adobe Camera RAW plugin for Adobe Photoshop. So this is what I'm going to be using. But you can also do this in Adobe Lightroom if you're using that, and maybe some other software too. But for this demonstration, I'm going to use the Adobe Camera RAW plugin in Adobe Photoshop. Okay, so I already have it open, as you can see here. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, because we have a hazy scene and because it's low contrast, you can see here that on the left side of your histogram where your shadows are, when the blacks, there's a big gap. There's a big gap of nothing. That basically means that there is no information there. There are no shadows at that end of the histogram. So we can easily rectify that by going down here to the black slider and sliding this to the left and pulling our histogram back over until we reach the far left of the graph. As you see, now if we pull it too far, you can see that we're starting to clip the shadows now, so we don't want to do that. We want to bring it to just as far as you can, just about here. This is nice. Already you see this has boosted the contrast a touch. Okay, in the foreground now. For the other side, we've also got a slight gap on the right side where the highlights are. We can pull that, we can adjust that by using the white slider. So we can pull that up a little bit. I don't want to pull it too far again. I'm going to pull it to about 30, just to bring the whites up a touch. Okay, so already that's made a big difference. Okay, now the next step, I can just pull up the contrast a touch. I never take it too far. Take it to about 10. That's good. We can adjust our highlights. So if we pull our highlights back, it will pull back a bit of the detail in the sky. Okay, if we pull it right over, we can see how much, but this is a bit harsh. I don't want to do, because this affects everything, as you can see. If we look down here on the face of the church, if I pull the highlights right over, I'm actually bringing out a lot of nasty detail on the church, which I don't want to do. So I'm just going to bring it back just a teeny touch there. Now I can use the highlights tool in the sky in another way, which I'm going to show you in a minute. Now the other tools down here we have, this is the dehaze tool. Perfect for this kind of a scene. But again, like many of these tools, you don't want to overdo it. There's a tendency to overdo it. See, if we push this too far, it looks nasty, ugly and horrible, especially if we zoom in at 100%. If you pull this over, you can see how horrible it looks. You get a lot of nasty pixelation in the sky. We don't want to do that. Let's take this back out. Really, I never take this above, rarely take this above 10%. Again, this affects the overall image, so I'm just going to take this up about 10%. I'm going to take the vibrance up a touch. Now the vibrance tool, unlike the saturation tool boosts overall color. The vibrance tool will just boost the colors that are a bit more muted. So the colors that are already vivid will not be affected, but the less vivid colors will be boosted a touch. So again, I usually take this up about 10%. Okay. Now, already you can see, if we compare the two images, we've made a massive difference to the image. Okay. Now, if we look at the two together, let's take that back. Okay, but I'm not quite finished. I still want to bring out some of the color and the detail in this sky. But as I said, all of the tools I'm using here are affecting the whole image. So now I want to go to this tool here. If you look at the top, the graduated filter tool. If we click here, we open the graduated filter toolbar down here on the right. The graduated filter tool emulates a neutral density graduated filter that we put on the front of our lens in the field. Now the way to use it, as I've shown you, you select the tool here, it brings up this toolbar here, and then you come over to the picture and you pick the point where you want the graduation to start. If you hold down the shift key, it helps to keep it straight. And then you pull it down to the point where you want the graduation to end, which is signified by the red bar at the bottom. So the larger this area, the softer the graduation. The narrower this area, the harder the graduation. Okay, so just quickly, I'm going to use a soft graduation here. Okay, so I'm going to start up here. I'm probably going to bring it down to just below here because I want to bring out this little bit of cloud a bit more here. So for those of you who don't know, anything above this green line is going to be completely affected by any of the changes we make here. Anything between the green and the red line will be affected on a gradual basis from 100% to 0%. Anything below the red line will not be affected at all. So to give you an example of this, if we pull back our exposure really far, you can clearly see how everything above has been affected. Anything in between is been affected on a gradual basis, and everything underneath has not been touched at all. Okay, so I am only going to bring my exposure back about 25%. I don't want to bring it too much, because if I bring it too much, then it's too dark. And really, I'm trying to recreate what I saw. I'm not trying to make it any different. So I really just want to pull that back just a tiny touch, and then I want to pull back my highlights a little bit more. Now by using the highlights tool here, I'm only affecting this area, not the whole image, as I showed you. So I can pull this back much further and not affect the facade of my church. So that's why I didn't want to do it too much before. Yeah, really I want to use this highlights tool to bring out the detail in that bit of cloud at the top and in the top of the sky. So I'm going to bring that back now to about there. That looks good. Okay. And again, I can use my dehaze tool here, and again I can use that to just affect this area and not the whole of the scene. So now I can use this again about 10%, and you can see it's dehazing this area nicely and giving some separation between the sky and the mountain peaks. So it's bringing out the detail of those mountain peaks nicely. Okay. Now I used a polarizing filter when I shot this. This also helps to dehaze your image, but again it doesn't work 100%. So this, in addition to the polarizing filter, makes a huge difference. Okay, so that's all I'm going to do here with the graduated filter tool. So again, let's look at the difference. Now you can see it makes a huge difference to the image. Okay, so the next step, I'm going to open the image in Photoshop. And add a few final finishing touches. I usually come down again to my shadows and highlights, because in Photoshop you have much more control. You can make more finer adjustments to the highlights than you can in Adobe Camera RAW. And the way to do this is make sure that you've got show more options checked, and then it brings up these extra little tools. So I've got the amount here, but this is important, the radius. Okay, I can affect, by increasing the radius, I can increase or decrease the area around each pixel that is affected. So the lower I have this number, the more harshly it's affected. As you can see, if we, just as an extreme, we'll pull this up to 40. If the radius is set at 4 pixels, then the adjustment is very, very harsh. If we bring it up here, you can see the adjustment is much less harsh. Okay, but again, I'm only really gonna make another minor adjustment of 10%. I use a large radius. If we flick off the preview, again we can see that we've brought out more detail on the mountain tops and on the sky too. Okay, so again, minor adjustment here in Photoshop. And finally, my curves, again to boost the contrast a bit more. Again, using the curves tool, you get finer adjustment. The way to do that is to pull down the bottom left third a touch and pull up the top right third a touch. Okay, and again, see, flick it on and off, we can see the difference. Okay, and that's it. That's the finished article. Okay, so that is how you can edit a hazy scene and a low contrast scene to bring back some of the detail and the contrast in the scene. Hope you've enjoyed this, and if you did, please give me a like and feel free to make a comment in the comments section. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel so you can see more of these kinds of videos, and catch you later.